I need to inform you that I've found someone more suitable for my future. I won't be attending our wedding next month. I wish you success in your endeavors. That was the entire message from Marcus, sent at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, exactly 32 days before our wedding. I stared at my phone, the quarterly reports from our care facility lying untouched on my desk as my world tilted sideways. 3 years together, 8 months of engagement, and countless I love yous all dismissed in 3 clinical sentences. My name is Evelyn Mitchell, and I'm a 32-year-old healthcare facility owner in suburban Boston. Until that morning, I thought I was living the dream, a successful elder care business, a beautiful office in our newly renovated facility, and engaged to a man I believed was my soulmate. Marcus and I met at a healthcare industry conference where his medical equipment company was a major sponsor. He swept me off my feet with his industry knowledge, apparent compassion for patient care, and what I mistook for genuine dedication to improving healthcare outcomes. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. The expensive medical equipment he pushed our facility to purchase despite our budget constraints, the late-night vendor meetings that left his collar smelling of unfamiliar perfume, the way he'd become defensive whenever I questioned certain charges on our joint business consulting account. But love has a way of making you ignore red flags, doesn't it? Even when they're waving right in front of your face, especially when they're disguised as care for your patient's well-being. Have you seen this? I texted Diana, my best friend and healthcare consultant, forwarding Marcus's message. Her response was immediate, "Don't move. I'm leaving my morning meeting right now." Diana found me still sitting in my office, now surrounded by wedding invitation samples that had arrived that morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. Join us in celebrating our commitment to care, printed in elegant silver foil on cream paper, while my phone displayed the death certificate of our relationship. What kind of coward breaks up through a message? Diana's voice shook with anger. After everything you've done to help his career in medical sales? She was right about that part. I'd helped Marcus secure contracts with several elder care facilities in our network, introduced him to key decision makers, and even postponed expanding our own facility so he could focus on launching his new medical equipment line. But here's what Marcus didn't know: I wasn't as naive as he assumed. For the past 3 months, I'd been quietly documenting his suspicious activities. The state-of-the-art medical equipment he'd gifted our facility, supposedly a special deal through his company, I'd already discovered was marked up significantly above market rate, and I'd documented all the irregularities. The money from canceling those orders was sitting in a separate account, waiting for what I hadn't been sure until now. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by something sharper, more focused. Marcus thought he could simply message his way out of our life together. He was about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating a woman who manages healthcare facilities for a living. The weeks leading up to Marcus's message had been filled with signs I couldn't ignore anymore. Like how he'd started taking calls in the parking lot, his voice dropping to a whisper, or the way his stories about vendor meetings didn't align with facility records. Business dinners at medical conferences that weren't actually happening, meetings with hospital boards that didn't exist on any calendar. Each suspicious moment felt like a small crack in our foundation, irritating but not quite severe enough to warrant a complete structural review. I'd met Marcus's parents several times, both of them proud of their son's success in medical sales. His mother Susan had accompanied me to look at wedding venues, tearing up as we toured a beautiful converted historical hospital that cost more than my first year's business lease. His father James had pulled me aside at our engagement party, telling me how happy he was that Marcus had finally found someone who understood the healthcare industry. Now I wondered if they knew about their son's double life, or if they were as deceived as I had been. Looking back, the changes began around March. Marcus started working later, claiming his company was handling a major hospital merger. But one night, I'd run into his colleague Mike at a medical suppliers conference. Merger? We haven't had any major hospital contracts since January, he'd said, confusion clear on his face. When I mentioned this to Marcus, he'd accused me of undermining his professional relationships, turning it around so somehow I was the one breaching trust. That night, I couldn't sleep while Marcus snored beside me. I opened my laptop, accessing our facility's vendor database, something I'd never thoroughly investigated before. His company's password was still our facility's registration number, which should have been a compliance red flag, but now felt like pure negligence. What I found made my stomach churn: emails to hospital administrators about exclusive supply contracts in Chicago, searches for healthcare facility management positions in the Midwest, and most telling, dozens of messages to someone named Sophia Anderson, the administrative director at St. Mary's Hospital. "I can't stand the guilt anymore," one email read. "Evelyn deserves better than this, but I can't help how I feel about you. The contracts we could build together." The timestamp showed 3 a.m., sent on a night he'd told me he was at an emergency suppliers meeting. That's when I decided to cancel the equipment orders. I remembered how proud he'd been presenting the contracts to our board, spinning a story about exclusive rates and cutting-edge technology that would revolutionize our patient care. The truth emerged when I had our financial team audit the proposals. The equipment was overpriced by nearly 40%, with kickbacks cleverly hidden in maintenance contracts. The $300,000 we saved by canceling became my insurance policy against whatever storm was coming. Diana's voice pulled me back to the present. "Earth to Evelyn," she said, waving a hospital acquisition proposal in front of my face. "What do you want to do about the medical conference next week? The venue deposit? The vendors?" I took a deep breath, my mind surprisingly clear. "First, I need to make a phone call," I said, pulling up the contact information for Thomas Hayes, a private investigator who specialized in healthcare fraud, recommended by a colleague who dealt with similar vendor issues. Then we're going to find out exactly who this more suitable person is, and what else our star medical equipment salesman has been hiding. Meeting Thomas Hayes felt surreal. His office was nothing like the dim, smoky spaces you see in movies. Instead, it was modern, bright, and professional, much like a high-end medical practice. He listened intently as I laid out what I knew, taking notes on a sleek tablet. "So these joint consulting charges," he said, gesturing at the bank statements I'd brought. "These expenses here, $48,000 in medical equipment demonstrations, $32,000 in client relationship building, none of these were legitimate business expenses?" "Not a single one," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "And they all occurred on days he claimed to be at medical conferences or supplier meetings that didn't exist." Thomas nodded, his expression professional yet focused. "And you mentioned he's planning something in Chicago's healthcare sector?" That's what his emails suggested, but I only saw glimpses before I stopped searching. I didn't want to compromise any potential investigation. I pulled out the documentation I'd gathered. "I have $300,000 from the canceled equipment orders. Will that be enough?" "More than enough," Thomas assured me. "I'll start with his medical supply chain records and recent hospital contracts. Give me a week." That week felt like the longest of my life. I threw myself into managing our facility, grateful that elder care administration required enough focus to keep my mind occupied. My staff never suspected that their usually composed director was tracking her fiancé's betrayal between care plan reviews and staff meetings. Then Thomas called. "Can you meet today?" His office felt smaller somehow as he spread documents across his desk, photos of Marcus entering high-end restaurants with an elegant woman in hospital administrator attire, the same woman getting into his car, receipts for medical conferences they'd attended together, equipment contracts with inflated prices. Her name is Sophia Anderson, Thomas explained. She's the administrative director at St. Mary's Hospital. They've been seeing each other since March, when your facility signed that major equipment contract. March. The month everything started changing. There's more, Thomas continued, pulling out financial records. Mr. Crawford has been operating well beyond ethical boundaries. Kickbacks, inflated contracts, even some questionable medical equipment certifications. It seems he's been using your facility's reputation to secure contracts with both relationships. My hands shook as I looked through the evidence. Marcus had leveraged our facility's name to win contracts worth millions, while using the profits to wine and dine Sophia. The Chicago plans weren't just about love. He was running from impending medical fraud investigations, planning to start fresh with Sophia in a new healthcare market. What are my options? I asked. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Well, that depends on what you want. We have enough here to trigger several medical board investigations. His company has strict policies about disclosure and kickbacks. We could also ensure Sophia sees these fraudulent contracts and certification reports. Or, I prompted. Or we could do something more strategic. Make him face everything at once: his lies, his fraud, his carefully constructed medical supply empire. But it would need to be handled carefully. I thought about Marcus's dismissive message, his casual cruelty in discarding our relationship and potentially endangering patient care with substandard equipment. A plan began forming in my mind. Tell me more about being strategic, I said. The first phase of my plan started with a simple message to Marcus: I accept your decision. I just need you to come sign off on some facility equipment contracts. His reply was almost insultingly quick: I'll send my assistant next week. No, I responded. There are regulatory compliance documents you need to review personally. Friday at 6. While waiting for Friday, I stayed busy. Thomas had discovered that St. Mary's Hospital had strict policies about vendor relationships, and guess whose company had just signed a major exclusive supply contract with them? I also learned that Marcus's boss Richard was obsessive about ethical compliance, especially after a recent healthcare fraud scandal at their firm. I invited Diana over to help me prepare the documentation. We arranged everything meticulously: printouts of his secret emails with Sophia, bank statements showing his kickback schemes, equipment contracts with inflated prices, and photos from Thomas's surveillance, all organized in professional-looking folders with regulatory compliance labels. At 5:55 p.m. on Friday, the elevator dinged. I opened my office door to find not just Marcus, but Sophia beside him. My heart lurched, but I kept my expression professionally neutral. She was elegant, I had to admit, with the polished look of a high-level hospital administrator, though now looking distinctly uncomfortable. I thought it would be better if we were honest about everything, Marcus said, his usual sales confidence wavering slightly at my lack of reaction. Sophia wanted to be perfect. I cut him off. You're both here. Come in. They followed me into the conference room where Richard, Marcus's boss, was already sitting with our facility's compliance officer. The color drained from Marcus's face. Richard? What are you? I invited them, I said calmly. Since we're being honest about everything. Those folders contain your regulatory documents. Feel free to review them. Sophia reached the first folder before Marcus, pulling out the equipment contracts and certification reports. Her professional composure cracked as she read through them. What is this? She demanded, turning to Marcus. These equipment prices are inflated by 40%. You said all these contracts were at preferred vendor rates. You said your relationship with Evelyn's facility was purely professional. There's more, I interrupted, gesturing to the other folders. Like the records of how he used my facility's reputation to secure your hospital's contracts, and documentation of how he violated both companies' compliance agreements. Oh, and Sophia, your hospital board might be interested in these vendor relationship violations. Richard stood up, his face thunderous. Crawford. My office, 8 a.m. Monday. Bring your registration papers and licenses. This isn't what it looks like, Marcus stammered, but Richard was already walking out with our compliance officer. Sophia grabbed her designer briefcase, tears threatening to ruin her perfect makeup. You told me you were just a supplier to this facility. That she was just a business connection you were ending. You said the Chicago position was already arranged. She stopped, mascara running, and rushed out. Marcus stood alone in our conference room, surrounded by evidence of his deceptions. Evelyn, please, I can explain everything, no need, I said. Your message was quite clear. You found someone more suitable, remember? Although I'm not sure she thinks so anymore. Marcus paced the room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. You had no right to do this, he sputtered, his sales persona crumbling. You went through my business records, had someone investigate me, just like you had no right to use my facility's reputation to sell overpriced equipment? I kept my voice steady. Or use our vendor relationship to secure fraudulent contracts? He grabbed one of the folders, rifling through documents. This could ruin me, he said, his voice rising. Richard is going to terminate our contracts. St. Mary's will blacklist me. How could you be so vindictive? Vindictive? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You ended our 3-year relationship with a message, Marcus. You were planning to leave me with thousands in fraudulent equipment contracts while you started fresh in Chicago with a new hospital network. And I'm vindictive? His expression shifted, trying to find that persuasive smile that had once convinced so many hospital administrators. Look, I know I handled things badly, but we can fix this. I'll break it off with Sophia, we can work something out with Richard. Just help me clean up this compliance issue. The same way you helped me review equipment contracts while secretly arranging deals with other facilities? I pulled out my tablet, showing him screenshots of his supplier negotiations. Or the way you helped me plan our wedding right after signing exclusive contracts with Sophia's hospital? That's different, he protested weakly. I was confused. I made mistakes, no, I said firmly. A mistake is forgetting to file a compliance report or misquoting a price. You orchestrated an entire fraudulent operation. You lied to everyone, me, Sophia, your company, even the medical board. Your certifications aren't even valid. The mention of certifications made him flinch. That's when I delivered the final blow. They know, by the way. I sent copies of everything to the state medical board yesterday. Your mother called me this morning crying. She's devastated, not just about Sophia, but about the kickbacks, the fraudulent certifications, all of it. Marcus sank into a conference chair, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face ashen. For the first time, I saw him clearly not as the successful medical equipment supplier I'd fallen in love with, but as someone who'd built his entire career on fraud and deception. What do you want? He asked quietly. Money? A public apology? Name it. I walked to the door and opened it. I want you to leave. Take your documents, you'll need them for the meetings I'm sure are coming up. The medical board, your company's compliance department, St. Mary's legal team, the equipment certification board, they'll all want to talk to you. After Marcus left, things moved quickly. Within a week, he'd lost his position apparently, Richard had been looking for a reason to investigate his contracts, and my evidence provided several. Sophia's hospital launched an ethics investigation, forcing her resignation, and those Chicago healthcare networks weren't too happy when they learned about his fraudulent certifications. I threw myself into managing our facility, grateful for understanding staff and endless care plans that needed my attention. But late at night, when my office felt too quiet, doubts would creep in. Had I gone too far? Was I just as bad as him, plotting revenge instead of walking away? Then I'd remember his message, 3 cold sentences dismissing our entire relationship. The countless lies, the money he'd made from inflated contracts while telling me we needed to be careful with our facility's budget for patient care. The way he'd used our relationship to build his fraudulent empire. A month after the confrontation, I met Thomas for coffee to close out his investigation. "I thought you'd want to know," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Marcus has moved back in with his parents in New Hampshire. His father is trying to help him handle the certification board investigation, but it's worse than we initially thought. The equipment fraud wasn't just occasional, he has some serious violations out there." I nodded, not sure how to feel about this information. "And Sophia took a position in California. From what I can tell, she wants nothing to do with him anymore." Thomas paused. "You know, in my line of work, I see a lot of people seeking revenge. Most of them go about it all wrong. They let emotion drive them to do things that only hurt themselves in the end. But you simply exposed the truth. Everything that's happened to him is a direct result of his own actions in our healthcare system." "Sometimes the truth is the best revenge," I said, thinking about how easily Marcus's lies had flowed, how casually he'd endangered patient care with his fraud. "I just made sure everyone saw it at once." Thomas smiled. "Well, your retainer still has some money left. Want me to keep monitoring the medical board investigation?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No, I'm done. He can handle his own regulatory issues now." As I walked back to our facility, my phone buzzed with a text from Diana, "Lunch tomorrow?" The new cafe near the medical center opened. My treat. I smiled, remembering how she'd stood by me through everything. That's when it hit me, the weight I'd been carrying, the constant tension in my shoulders when reviewing contracts was gone. Marcus's betrayal had broken my heart, yes, but it hadn't broken my spirit or my commitment to ethical healthcare. The truth was my weapon, and I'd wielded it perfectly. Marcus had thought he could simply press send on a message and walk away unscathed from both our relationship and his professional responsibilities. Instead, his carefully constructed house of fraudulent contracts had collapsed, leaving him to face the consequences of every certification he'd falsified. The next few months brought changes I never expected. Without Marcus's questionable contracts draining our resources, our facility's finances improved significantly. I started implementing new care programs, working with legitimate suppliers who appreciated our commitment to patient care. My reputation in the healthcare community grew stronger. Administrators who valued integrity over kickbacks sought out our facility's partnership. One morning, while reviewing patient satisfaction reports at my usual coffee spot, I ran into Richard, Marcus's former boss. He'd been instrumental in the aftermath of my revelations, though we'd never discussed it directly. "Evelyn," he said warmly, "how are you holding up?" I stirred my coffee, considering the question. "Actually, I'm doing really well. Better than I expected." He nodded, then hesitated. "Listen, I should have told you this sooner. We'd been investigating Marcus's certification records for months before everything came out. There were irregularities we couldn't ignore, but we had no idea about the personal side of things. Sophia, the extent of the fraud. You did us a favor bringing it all to light at once." I just needed the truth to come out, I replied. Everything else was just consequences of his actions. Well, speaking of consequences, Richard continued, we're restructuring our entire medical supply division, all 40,000 square feet of inventory and offices. Would you be interested in consulting on the project? Your facility's reputation for ethical management is excellent, and after everything, well, let's just say I trust your attention to detail. That consultation became my biggest project yet, a complete healthcare supply chain overhaul that would establish new standards in our industry. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus's downfall had led to my biggest professional breakthrough. My parents, who'd been heartbroken about the canceled wedding, now proudly told friends about their daughter, the healthcare compliance consultant. Mom even confessed that she'd never fully trusted Marcus. Something about his equipment pricing had always seemed off to her, she said, like he was trying too hard to make the sale. Diana convinced me to start accepting other consulting projects, though I was hesitant. Not everyone is hiding a fraudulent certification scheme, she insisted. And now you know all the red flags to watch for. She was right about the red flags. I found myself noticing things I might have overlooked before: inconsistencies in supply chain documentation, subtle manipulations in contract negotiations, the way some vendors talked about their certification processes. Each observation felt like a small victory, proof that I'd learned from my experience rather than being broken by it. The last ties to Marcus unraveled slowly. His mother called one final time, apologizing again for her son's fraudulent behavior and returning some facility documents I'd left at their house. I donated all the wedding items we've collected, no point in keeping reminders of a bullet dodged. The venue deposit, the carefully chosen vendor contracts, all of it went away, making room for new possibilities. Sometimes, usually late at night while reviewing facility reports, I'd think about Sophia. Had she been as fooled as I was by his professional demeanor? Did she lie awake wondering which parts of their hospital contracts had been legitimate? I hoped she'd found her way to a better position too, free from his web of healthcare fraud. The money from the canceled equipment orders, my inadvertent emergency fund, turned out to be seed money for expanding our facility's ethical supply chain program. I hired 2 compliance specialists and moved into a proper administrative suite. Every time I signed a legitimate vendor contract or approved a properly certified equipment purchase, I thought about Marcus's dismissive message. He thought he was ending our story, but really, he just freed me to write a better one. Almost a year after Marcus's message, I received an unexpected email from Sophia. She was back in Boston briefly and wanted to meet. I agreed, more out of professional curiosity than anything else, and we arranged to meet at a quiet cafe away from the medical district. She looked different from that day in my office, more grounded, her designer suit replaced with practical business attire. She'd cut her long hair into an efficient bob and traded her luxury accessories for a simple leather briefcase. We ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence until she finally spoke. "I've been wanting to thank you," she said, turning her cup slowly. "Not just for exposing Marcus, but for doing it the way you did all at once, with all the evidence present. It was humiliating at the time, but it was like removing a bandage, painful but quick." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "How are you doing now?" "Better. Much better." The position in California was a fresh start. I'm managing compliance for a major hospital network now. No more questionable supplier relationships. She paused. "I'm seeing someone new, an architect who specializes in healthcare facilities. He's genuine. No hidden certifications, no secret contracts, just an honest professional who actually cares about his work." She paused. "I heard through mutual connections that Marcus tried to contact you?" "He did," I confirmed, remembering the desperate voicemails and emails that had started arriving about 6 months after the confrontation. I never responded. Me neither, Sophia said. Though he tried hard enough, sent proposals to my new office in San Francisco, called my parents, even tried to reach me through LinkedIn. She shook her head. It's like he still doesn't get it. He's not sorry for what he did, he's just sorry he got caught. We talked for almost 2 hours, filling in the gaps in each other's stories. Her version of Marcus had been completely different from mine. He'd played the role of a successful single medical supplier, telling her his long hours were due to managing his own certification portfolio. He'd even hinted at marriage, all while planning a wedding with me. You know what the strangest part is? Sophia said as we prepared to leave. In all the time we worked together, he never once let me see his actual supplier documentation. Always had an excuse pending audits, certification reviews, compliance checks. She laughed quietly. Now I know why. He told me our facility's equipment certification process was taking 6 months straight, I added with a wry smile. I guess juggling fraudulent paperwork gets complicated. Before we parted, Sophia handed me an envelope. These were in my files. I thought you might want to decide what to do with them. Inside were photos of Marcus with me at various healthcare conferences. I'd appeared in the background of pictures meant to document his networking with Sophia. I dropped the envelope in the first recycling bin I passed. Those memories, like Marcus himself, no longer had any power over me. That evening, I had dinner with Diana and told her about meeting Sophia. You both dodged a major compliance violation, she said, raising her glass. Here's to spotting fraudulent certifications and coming out stronger. I clinked my glass against hers, thinking about how far I'd come. Here's to knowing your own worth, I added, and never settling for questionable credentials. Looking back now, I can hardly recognize the facility director who received that cold message from Marcus. She was someone who thought ethical compromises were part of business, who measured her worth through someone else's validation. The journey from that morning to where I am now wasn't easy, but it transformed me in ways I never expected. My healthcare facility has flourished beyond my wildest expectations. The compliance consulting project for Richard's company led to partnerships with other medical suppliers, and I've had to hire 3 more specialists to keep up with the demand for ethical supply chain management. Last month, a prestigious healthcare journal featured our work on their cover, a comprehensive case study on implementing transparent certification processes that perfectly captured my philosophy of combining integrity with efficiency. The money I saved from canceling Marcus's fraudulent equipment orders turned out to be the best investment I ever made, not just financially, but ethically. It taught me to trust my instincts about certification documentation, to act decisively when compliance issues arise. That lesson has served me well in both business and life. Diana jokes that I should thank Marcus for setting me free, but I don't give him that much credit. My success came from choosing integrity over convenient lies, from refusing to let his fraud define my facility's future. Instead of drowning in bitterness about falsified documents, I channeled that energy into building something meaningful. Sometimes new clients ask about the sealed certifications on my office wall, the ones that replaced Marcus's fraudulent equipment contracts. I used to feel embarrassed, but now I tell them the truth. They're reminders of when I chose legitimate business practices over comfortable deception, ethical standards over easy profits, and self-respect over settling. Last week, I was meeting a new supplier at the same medical center where Marcus first proposed our partnership. As I waited for them to arrive, I caught my reflection in the window, confident, successful, at peace. The receptionist recognized me and mentioned that Marcus had been in recently, looking worse for wear, trying to impress potential clients with stories about pending certification appeals. Some things never change, but I have. The facility director who once desperately tried to understand his fraudulent documentation now runs a thriving consulting practice built on transparency and trust. The engagement contract money that was meant to bind me to his schemes instead set me free.